Thank you. Next question, and Stephen, you'll answer this first, is with the role of the president. Now, given that the president doesn't actually have a vote in student assembly resolutions and is more the facilitator of conversation at meetings, can you describe what a typical student assembly meeting would look like under your leadership as opposed to your opponents?
Sure. So the role of the president is to really be that external face. As PR, I was in charge of external messaging. The president is that external face. It's the ambassador, if you will, of the student assembly, which is why I'm so passionate about this position, because I've been on so many different areas of campus. I've seen the commonalities and the differences that we all share. You know, being Black Greek, being one of the only Black people in my pledge class was a very interesting experience for me. And it really defined some of my experience on campus. So has being on student government. My social identity is encompassed of many different features, the same way Cornell has one of the most diverse campuses in the Ivy League. And that's why I'm so passionate about it, because I want to engage each of you guys. That said, in terms of how the meeting would look, you know, the meeting would look very orderly. I'm kind of surprised, you know, Ulysses is probably one of the most vocal during the meetings, and I express my opinion on a limited basis, because when I feel strongly, I actually say it, because I want to reserve the clout and the energy that I have. It's not just about putting my message out there all the time, but saying something that's effective and that's getting it done. And I believe that I'd be able to steer the student assembly into putting out efforts, into putting out messaging, and actually talking about resolutions and creating effective dialogue. It's not just about being the contrasting view on a resolution that comes up, but it's more so about adding value to that resolution. So I believe that during those meetings, I would be the person that would be able to facilitate the conversation through members that would add dialogue, add actual value to each of the resolutions and the piece of legislation that we'd be working on.
So, the first part of this, in terms of the meeting, I think absolutely. Right now, currently, I am a very vocal member on the assembly, particularly when I don't think somebody has really taken into account how all students would feel about a particular measure. How are we really engaging? Did you really engage X community when you wrote this, or was this an on-the-fly initiative that didn't go through a particular body? And that has often been the case. So for one, I agree the meeting would be definitely organized, but for sure the audience would look like this. I don't know if any of you have been to an assembly meeting, but you know, they can be pretty long and boring sometimes to a lot of students, and nobody really sticks around, nobody really comes. But that's because we have never really empowered community members to come in and take part of our initiatives, because they've been our initiatives. And sure, it's great that we spearhead things, but it's not always the best option, because we don't allow for student buy-in. We don't allow students that opportunity to really create their own initiatives. We don't allow students the opportunity to define what they want to see come from the student assembly. One of my constituents, Katerina Athanasiou, she actually authored a course proposal for architecture, art, and planning. And actually, we've been working on that, implementing that course proposal over the past couple of years. So again, I think that's one thing, but for sure we would definitely not be talking in circles at these essay meetings like we do now. We really want to foster much more dialect and include the community more.
Stephen, your response?
Yeah, sure. You know, one of the things that always eeks at me as well is going to an essay meeting and seeing just a select group of students in the audience. I think that eats away at me. You know, I think as PR and then also diversity and inclusion, we've been given ample opportunity to do that. So I don't, you know, if we're making excuses, call us out on that, because I don't think it's fair to you guys. That said, you know, one of the key pieces is going to actually be creating student buy-in, and that's through a range of efforts, not just student organizations, not just student groups, being on the ground, interacting with students. I think 5%, right now, it's like 90% of our job is getting on the essay. Once we're in, it stops. There's no accountability, there's no credibility. 5% of our duty should be the campaigning season, and 95% of it should actually be outreaching to every single one of you students in the audience, seeing what you have to say. And honestly, I think we're doing such a horrible job at that, and that's how we're gonna get the 5 or 10 students to look like 50 or 100 students at every single meeting in the memorial room on Thursday at 4:45 p.m.
And Ulysses, in your response, what is the best way to increase student engagement at meetings?
Well, for sure, it's got to, well, I won't say that. We need to adopt a participatory structure. I think right now, we really, an audience member can speak after every third assembly member. That's a long time for somebody to wait, and by that time, it's likely that a resolution will already be called to question and already voted on before you even got a chance to say anything. So I think we really need to change that speaking rule for one, and allow students more of an opportunity to say something. Additionally, I think we really need to give more authority back to our community, back to our committee structures. I don't think we've done that enough. We haven't actively engaged our community as much as we should have been in terms of actually creating really great and valuable resolutions. I think it's interesting that my opponent that Stephen has pointed out the jobs of VP Diversity and VP Public Relations. Since he is the VP of Public Relations, there should be no excuse that all of you don't know a lot of the initiatives of the Assembly, and that you don't know. How many of you know who your Assembly representative is? A lot of you are in AAP. I see some hands back there. So I'm a little, but see, that's a problem. That was his job, was to really effectively communicate that. I think, sure, he's put his PR strategy up, but he's put it up on his campaign website. I think you've done much more work on your campaign this year than you have done your job overall as VP Public Relations, and that's a problem. You have not been putting the people first as we should have been doing, and that's what we're looking to change here. We cannot perpetuate that any longer. We're not here to boost our resumes. We're here to serve all of you. We need to prioritize students, and that's what I'm going to do going into this next year.
I'll give you a chance to respond.
Thank you very much. So I want to address one of the first things he said. It wasn't about me. It was about, he said, we need to strengthen our committees, and that'll help us engage the community. Committees don't equal communities. I know we have many committees on the Student Assembly. That doesn't cover all 14,000 students on campus. So while I agree that's a step, I don't think it's the appropriate step. So you talked about, PR, resumes. You keep on, experience is great, but relevant experience is even better. And I'm here to tell you that because I've been on the Assembly for 2 years, I instilled faith in every single Student Assembly member enough that I was voted PR on my second year on the Student Assembly. I can actually outreach to all of you guys. All right, so if you look at Ulysses, you were VP Outreach as a junior, and then I don't know what happened after that. So I'm here to tell you that I've done my position to the best of my ability, and there have been some pitfalls as for diversity and inclusion. And I'm not here to I'm trying to keep this as positive as possible, because at the end of the day, throwing daggers at each other doesn't get us anywhere, because it's more about student engagement and student proactiveness. But I want to tell you that, it's not just about the position that we have, but what we've done outside of the Student Assembly that we can bring to the table as well. And I have the breadth of experience, not the depth of experience. I haven't been on for 4 years, but during the 2 years, I've made the most of my Cornell experience and has brought it all the way back to the Student Assembly.
Ulysses, a 30-second response before we move to the next topic.
Sure. I don't know if you've been paying attention or not, but I know exactly what happened after I was VP Outreach. I know I was the first VP of Outreach who instituted outreach events, who actually said all SA members must now hold outreach events with their target constituencies to make sure that we're actually effectively getting out there and collecting feedback from our constituents. That's what happened when I was VP Outreach. Then I was elected VP Diversity and Inclusion, and we have a diversity and inclusion plan that we've been making great strides on. So I think my experience is pretty relevant.
Great. Let's give the candidates a round of applause.
Thank you, gentlemen. The next set of questions is going to focus on current campus issues that might come in front of the SA in the following year. The first question, the SA has recently looked into options for instituting a university-wide social justice requirement. Would you support a resolution to impose such a requirement? Ulysses?
First, I want to make it very clear, academics is not within the jurisdiction of the Student Assembly. Point blank period, it is not. Now what we have been doing is trying to answer a few sets of questions. One, how can we better incorporate diversity into the classroom? That was the question we were asked. The other was, how can we address the everyday, how can we treat each other better on the ground? Now, would I entertain a resolution that said we need to institute a university-wide diversity requirement? One, I would entertain it because that's our job, is to entertain any initiative that students bring forward. However, do I think that's the best course of action? The answer is no. Now, the Assembly was asked by student organizations and various groups of students over the past couple semesters to investigate the possibility of implementing a social justice, human diversity requirement. We don't know what that would look like at this point in time. All we did, in my role as VP Diversity Inclusion, all I did was have a team go out to each of the colleges, ask sets of questions about process. How do you change the curriculum in your college? What would it look like if you chose to implement such a requirement? What would that look like? It would not happen on the university level. I can tell you that now. It's not going to happen. it would likely happen through the colleges if they chose to do that. But I think that should be under the jurisdiction of the colleges to determine that, so they can best determine how they think the practical application of that particular topic is associated. Now we've taken that information, put it online, and given it back to the students, and that was my goal, and I'm happy we will engage in further discussion of it.
Sure. So for the social justice requirement, I mean, I agree with it in principle, but I think one of the things that I really noticed once we actually put it on the table is how, you know, quickly so many eyes went to it. It listed options and never actually said we should implement anything. And, you know, as for entertaining it, of course, you know, it's our job to actually look at student-driven initiatives, but in terms of actually implementing something tangible, I think we're very far from that step. There are so many options listed on the table, and it doesn't have to be an academic one. It could also be a co-curricular one. It could be an extracurricular one. Now, I'm saying that if students don't want an academic social justice requirement, there shouldn't be one. But actually, we don't know yet. We actually don't know yet. So what I'm saying is I'm not a proponent, and I'm not an opponent yet. I think there needs to be much more student input before we actually create, you know, a tangible decision. If it's a report, then yes, we'll absolutely retain a report. If it's a resolution calling to action, well, for the sake of the students, there needs to actually be student-driven data and student-driven buy-in for us to actually pass that. There's no way as president next year, I would go up to President Scorton or forward along a resolution saying, hey, this needs to happen, when I knew in my heart it was only supported by 25 really passionate, you know, loud students. You know, there's power in tapping, but there's more power in fists. And I want to see more numbers actually supporting something like this before we'd actually take it on.
Okay, thank you.